So I recently had a brief conversation with my dog, Lainey, who's sitting right here. So if we are bothered or disturbed by a canine in the course of this video, you'll know why. So Lainey is a very curious creature. She's an undecided voter, right? She's holding out. She's definitely a one-issue voter, and we all know what that issue is. But nonetheless, she's very curious. So she heard me the other day saying that Donald Trump does not have the authority to tell states what to do when it comes to quarantines or isolation or social distancing, right? He had claimed at one time the authority to dictate all of that. He's since backed off of that because some lawyers apparently got in his ear and told him that that's not the case. So Lainey asked me, well, if Donald Trump does not have the authority to tell states what to do, then why are people all over him, right? Why is it his responsibility to dictate some kind of federal response, right? If he's not in charge of what the states do, then how is he responsible for, right, he's being criticized for things like not enough tests, right, not enough federal coordination, not enough assistance went out to the states, not enough ventilators, et cetera, et cetera. So she asked me, why is that? And it struck me as, it's a good question, right? I mean, probably a question that Donald Trump is asking himself repeatedly. If I'm not in charge, why are people looking at me? So I thought I would take just a few minutes to address why it is that even though the president does not have the authority to dictate, right, how the crisis is being handled throughout the country, the president does have the authority to coordinate a national response. So, one more time for old time's sake, the federal government has limited powers, right, enumerated powers. The federal government has certain powers and state governments have certain powers, and each level of government is supposed to stay in their lane, as I've explained in another video. The power that the federal government has for our purposes here, in terms of the power that really relates to the pandemic, is the power of the federal government, right, through Congress to regulate interstate commerce, right, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states. This is called the Commerce Clause, and again, it empowers the federal government through Congress to regulate interstate commerce. Now, interstate commerce is pretty broad, but it does have its limits, right? Because remember that the federal government is not the government of general jurisdiction, right, over what's going on. That tends to be the states. When you talk about interstate commerce, right, there's a whole, you can do a 3-credit course on what that means, right? It means infrastructure, it means channels of commerce, it means instrumentalities of commerce, it means activities that really impact the entire national economy, right? That's the kind of stuff Congress can regulate under the Commerce Clause. Now remember that the executive, right, the president's job is to enforce Congress's laws, right? So the president can only enforce the laws that Congress passes, and Congress can't pass laws outside of its enumerated powers. So basically the president is left in many, many cases enforcing a law that regulates interstate commerce, right, rather than some other component of life. Police power, on the other hand, is what courts say belongs to the states, right? And this is the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment gives the federal government enumerated listed powers, and it reserves the rest to the states or to the people. I've put up here a quote from the U.S. Supreme Court that really defines what police power is, right? It is the power, and here the court says we won't strike down state or local law. They said ordinance here, but I put brackets there to clarify what they're really talking about is broader. A state or local law won't be declared unconstitutional unless, right, arbitrary and unreasonable, having no substantial relation to, here it is, here's your definition of police power: health, safety, morals, general welfare. Asterisk on morals, there's a big question on whether states really can regulate morals, especially when they're private morals, but that's for another day. Health, safety, general welfare, certainly that's part of the police power. So when you look at the pandemic, right, you back up here and you say, okay, Congress can only regulate interstate commerce, right, the president can only enforce Congress's laws, and it's the states, right, that have the police power to regulate for the health, safety, and general welfare. Well, what's the pandemic? Well, the pandemic, obviously, is a health and safety issue and a general welfare issue. I want you to bookmark that term in your head, general welfare, right? The well-being generally of the population. So health, safety, and general welfare are all in play when it comes to, right, managing COVID-19 coronavirus. So it would be logical to conclude, just from what we've seen so far, that states are completely in charge, right? They're totally in control. They're completely responsible for what happens, right, as a result of this pandemic. There's nothing the federal government can do about it because the federal government doesn't have police power. It only has power over interstate commerce, and this is more of a police-powered thing, right, a general welfare thing. Now, this is why some people love being lawyers and some people hate being lawyers. I say to students all the time, it's all about the words, right? We have to look at yet another clause of the Constitution, right, outside of the Commerce Clause. So in Article 1, Section 8, you have the list of powers that Congress has, and here's one of them, right? As a matter of fact, this is the first one. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, okay, ... and to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Did you see some terms there that I told you to bookmark? General welfare. Here you should be saying, wait a minute, I thought states had the police power. This is in Article 1, Section 8, which gives the federal government, right, Congress, its power. Why is the Constitution talking about general welfare here if regulating the general welfare is reserved to the states under Article 10? Well, the reason is that this provision does not give Congress, right, or the federal government the authority to regulate, right, for the general welfare. Check it out again. Look at that word in red, right? This is called the spending clause, by the way, the taxing and spending clause, right? When it comes to the money it spends, Congress may provide for the general welfare. That doesn't mean it can regulate for the general welfare, but they're allowed to provide for the general welfare. So let's take a look at what it means to regulate, right? Regulate is what Congress is allowed to do with interstate commerce. With regard to the general welfare, Congress is only allowed to provide for it. So to regulate means to govern or direct according to rule or to bring under the control of law or constitute authority, right? So to exercise authority over. Provide, on the other hand, just means to supply or make available. I hope this is starting to ring a bell about what people are complaining that the federal government is not doing, right? People are not complaining, for the most part, that the federal government has failed to regulate. Everybody seems to is beginning to understand that that's up to states. What people are complaining about is that the government has not provided, right, enough assistance. Now, is the federal government, is the executive branch, is the president authorized to do that? Yes. I've pulled this from the CDC website. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, right, is a federal agency that under the executive branch that works for the president, so under the control of the president. The CDC, on its website, notes this law passed by Congress, 42 U.S.C. 264. And this is a great summary on their website of who's supposed to be doing what under this law. And now that you know what the Constitution says about regulating and providing, right, the federal government may provide but may not regulate for the general welfare. This summary is going to make more sense constitutionally, right? So the CDC explains that the federal government has the authority to assist state and local authorities in preventing the spread of disease, right? Notice the word assist, provide for, right? Help. That's what we're talking about here, right? To provide money is to help, and resources. State and local governments, the CDC says, are to enforce isolation and quarantine within their borders. So you see here a very neat distinction between what the federal government is allowed to do, what states are allowed to do. Everybody's staying in their lane, right? And it makes sense. It makes sense that the federal government would be allowed to provide for something even if it couldn't regulate something. The whole idea here is state sovereignty, right? Under the 10th Amendment, the federal government is not supposed to be dictating to states how states conduct their business. They have the police power, right, over their own states. So one sovereign, the United States, cannot dictate to another sovereign, a state, how to run its business. But it's perfectly fine for one sovereign to assist another sovereign. That happens all the time, right? It's called alliances, right? And foreign aid. There's nothing wrong with one sovereign helping another sovereign if that other sovereign is asking for help, right? And so that's why the Constitution has that dividing line in it, right? The federal government, although it may not dictate the states, right, how to regulate for the general welfare, it may provide for the general welfare, right, when called upon to do so, and help, right, the general population in a situation like the one we are in. Now, since there is a law authorizing the president to do that, as you see right here, right, the federal law authorizes the president to assist states through the CDC. That means the president can do that. So when you talk about the president's authority here. So here's where President Trump is stuck. He's not allowed to dictate what states do, but he is only allowed to help. So I guess, I don't want to get into too much politics here. You can decide for yourself whether that's going to be President Trump's style, right? Is to offer assistance without strings attached, right? When he is not allowed to dictate, again, which he seems to have internalized at this point. Not allowed to dictate what states do when they impose quarantines, when they lift quarantines, right? All he can do is tweet at them and urge people to liberate states, whatever that means. But he is not allowed to dictate what happens. He's only allowed to help. He's not only allowed to help, he's authorized to help. So, if we were going to have a national program, right, to try to coordinate a response, if we were going to have testing for the majority of Americans, if we were going to have ventilators, being pumped into hospitals, if we were going to do all that on a national level, does the president have the authority to do that? Yes, he does, because Congress has the authority to spend for the general welfare, and Congress has authorized the president to do so. What that means ultimately is that when it comes to coordinating a national response, indeed the buck stops here. That, of course, is a picture of the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. So that's why the criticism. I'm not going to opine whether it's justified on policy grounds, but the criticism is not that the federal government is not taking over, right, or regulating. The criticism is that the government is not assisting, and assisting is the only thing the federal government is authorized to do when it comes to managing a pandemic like this on a national level. So I hope that helps understand that the answer to that question, and I'll keep on going. If you like these videos and you find them helpful, please, YouTubers now are supposed to always ask us, please make sure to click like, subscribe, share, and all that good stuff. And if there's continued interest in this stuff, then I'll continue to post videos. But thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you soon.